everybody, and welcome to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. You're looking extraordinarily rested. Anyone would think we just had summer holidays. I
know. So we're back. We're back with a bang. We're back to the new season of Mind the Gap. I've had a good holiday, and I'm so thrilled because this feels like it's a long time coming. We're starting off the year with welcome to Alom Shaha. Welcome, Alom.
Hi, Tom. Hi. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's great. I feel like we're kindred spirits. We're physics teachers. So if Emma is also going just to let us talk physics, that would make for the greatest episode.
Hey, Thomas, let me stop you there. I am a science graduate. I'll have you know. Thank you very much. Not physics, I'll grant you, but
it's true. But so I'll ask you to say this in a minute, but my sort of awareness of you, Alom, goes back a long time. So I felt like Twitter started for me about 10 or 11 years ago, and you were always there, it seems to me.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
But it's one of those things, and so I've kind of been following you, aware of you and what you've been up to for a long time. And
did we meet in person very briefly at the first Research Ed?
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah.
I think we did. Yeah, I think we were in the green room or whatever very briefly together. And
that was very cool. And you one of the first things that I was aware of you was you wrote this fantastic book called the Young Atheist's Handbook.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
yeah,
a long time ago.
And it's a very personal account about your own sort of trajectory and so on. So I mean, we'll talk about your new books in a minute. But is that still something that you get asked to talk about or refer to?
Yeah, I mean, it was an unusual book. It is an unusual book in that I set out to write a book about atheism and non-belief for young people, which was just from my perspective as a teacher, as a physics teacher, as I'm sure you know, that those big questions used to come up in class, and that there's not that much time and space in physics lessons to really delve into them. And that was what prompted my desire to write a book about non-belief for young people. And I wrote up a proposal and took it to an agent who said, "This is a very worthwhile idea. It's really good, but nobody's going to buy it." And I thought that was the end of my kind of writing career. And then I think she was playing with me a bit. She then said, "But I like how you write. Why don't you just write about your journey and about why you are an atheist?" And so I ended up writing this very peculiar blend of memoir and kind of exposition of ideas, which I think it works as a book. And the most gratifying thing about it is just the kind of sheer number of readers who have written to me to say thank you for writing the book. It made me feel not alone. And it's very cheesy, but if you've seen the film Shadowlands, which is about C.S. Lewis, there's a line in the movie which C.S. Lewis says, but I think was actually just written by the scriptwriter. And C.S. Lewis in the film says, "We read to know that we are not alone." And I think that's the one thing I managed to accomplish with that book, which was to tell a story that resonated with people who felt that they hadn't had that story told before, partially or largely because I'm from a Muslim background, and it's not so easy for most people from Muslim backgrounds to become openly atheist, I think. So yeah, I'm very proud of the book, and it's still kind of got a life of its own out there. And I was on the board of Humanists UK for a while, and I still am openly atheist, and I would describe myself as a humanist, and it's an important part of my identity. But I think, oh God, these days everyone has all these identities. And, what I would say is that in terms of identity, we have different identities that we kind of bring to the fore at different times. And really, Twitter's an unusual place because I think we can become very mixed up, or I certainly am not one person on Twitter. I'm quite schizophrenic on it. But yeah, thank you for asking about that book, because it really started me off on my writing career, and it's a very important book to me.
Well, it was an important book to me. I mean, I felt like I was at the time, running a school and talking about religion, and we used to do the Lord's Prayer in assembly, and I was an atheist, and I just had to say, look, I used to do assemblies to my students saying, "I know we do the Lord's Prayer because this is a tradition, but this is what I believe," and I used to do a similar thing. I got real strength from you, even though I didn't have to sort of pull away from a faith background. And I still remember the story of how you had your first bacon sandwich as a kind of, like a sort of totem of the kind of breaking out. It was just, that's a sort of little symbol of it, of the change, and how sort of big a deal that was in the family. So it was a beautiful book. So just for people who are not sure, I mean, that's how I came across you. Tell people who might not know, much about your background, what you're doing now. What's your kind of world of work at the moment?
I mean, I would say to your listeners, who I imagine are mostly teachers, I am professionally, I'm a teacher first and foremost. I started teaching 25 years ago. I'm kind of shocked to say, and I've had about 15 or 16 of those 25 years in the classroom. I took quite a long break in my mid 20s to mid 30s, where I worked in television for about 8 or 9 years, and I left teaching and went into this very glamorous industry that everyone thinks television's cool, and it was an amazing experience. I got to travel, I got to meet lots of interesting people, I got to do lots of interesting things and learn how to become a filmmaker, working at the BBC and so forth. But towards the end of my time in TV, I had a growing sense of dissatisfaction, and I became very disillusioned with the world of television and the kind of way the industry worked. And my last job was working on Teachers TV, which was I don't know if any of your listeners will remember, it was a kind of satellite television channel for teachers, which sadly I think was ahead of its time. It had all this money and funding to make programs, and unfortunately it was before the age of YouTube and so forth. And I think an awful lot of money was wasted, and it wasn't run by the right people as far as I was concerned. I think if it was around today, there'd be a lot more teachers who are a lot more media savvy and so forth, who would be able to contribute. But I was working at Teachers TV, and I did this big filming project, which was filming live at a school, and it really reminded me how great teaching could be. And I just really missed the sense of community and purpose and meaning that teaching had given me. And I just thought, I'm going to go back into teaching. I think a lot of my friends thought I was crazy. I was, leaving this very glamorous industry, very well paid industry. By the time I left teaching, I was a producer, director, earning more money than I've ever earned in teaching. But I was going through probably some kind of midlife crisis, as we do, and I was looking for meaning and purpose in my life. And whatever you say about teaching, nobody can ever turn around and say that teaching isn't useful. And going back to what we were talking about earlier about being atheist, if you're an atheist and you don't believe in an afterlife or a God, then that you have to make your own meaning and purpose in this life. And teaching is a fantastic profession for doing that. We contribute to society in a unique way. We are working alongside our fellow human beings, and as I said, in the best schools, in the best environments, you feel part of a community, and being part of a community is I think important to our sense of well-being, or certainly to my sense of well-being. So yeah, I left television and went back into teaching, but television had changed me in that I really kind of had got an itch for being creative, for making things. And very, very luckily, what I've been able to do since going back into teaching is work part-time as a teacher, and then work on various kind of creative projects, ranging from videos about science practicals for teachers to my latest project is a children's picture book. And what I would say is all my creative work has been informed and inspired by my teaching. So one of the things that I struggle with in TV, I think people would always say, "Oh, that's too didactic, that's too educational," as if people don't want to be taught. And if you look at my body of work, it's all teaching related. It's all I think learning is wonderful. People do want to be taught, and so even this new.
I mean, it is for people. I mean, if you just look at your name on Amazon, and then you've just got a lot of books. Can I just check then? Is the book you're referring to How to Find a Rainbow?
That's right. Yeah, that's my first. It's a first work of fiction, first children's picture book, and I'm very excited about it. Obviously, it's come about because I became a dad 6 years ago, and I think both of you are parents, and you know that you end up reading millions and millions and millions of picture books. So I think most parents become kind of expert in picture books. And weirdly, I'd done a master's in creative writing a few years ago, which is probably a little bit unusual for a science teacher. But I've got an unfinished novel in my desk, but I'm very pleased to say that I've managed to put what I learned about writing fiction into this children's picture book. I think I really am excited about it. I think it's a piece of work that is every piece of work is kind of a development from what I've done in the past. And so with children's picture books, I'm sure you're aware that a lot of children's picture books have like a moral at the end, like be kind or share stuff or whatever. And I thought I wanted to write a picture book where instead of a moral at the end, like the characters make some kind of scientific discovery. And so in this particular book, which I hope will be the first of the series, the scientific discovery is how rainbows are formed. And the two characters are based on my daughters, really, really obviously. And I'm sure they'll work it out when they're older, like, oh, that's me and that's me. But so I kind of feel like I cheated a bit as well, because the character development was quite easy because I modeled the characters on my daughters.
Amazing.
Wow.
Emmy, you're going to get that one.
I'm just listening to this, and I'm just thinking that it's so interesting and so wonderful to hear a teacher who's been a teacher, gone and done something else, and then come back. And I think the message about not only teaching potentially giving you purpose and kind of direction and a kind of a grounding in how you feel about your life, but also that teaching is kind of a potential springboard to other things at the same time as well. This kind of hybrid career model that you've got now, I think, is hugely important for teachers in the profession to hear, to say, you can teach, and those skills from teaching and that knowledge from teaching is transferable into other creative avenues as well. So as you were teaching, I was just kind of talking, sorry, I was just going down my list of, oh, that's interesting, flexible working, hybrid career, other avenues, recruitment and retention. It's like you've mastered this way of working that allows you to keep teaching but also do all of these other wonderful things, which I just think is a great model for teachers to hear, that it's not all or nothing, that actually teaching can be the springboard for other things.
Absolutely. And I would say that I started off as a teacher, and one thing that really kind of almost offends me is that people are far more impressed by all the other things that I do, and actually the most difficult, the most challenging, the most creative thing that I do is teach. And I wish we lived in a society where people would think, oh wow, he's a teacher, or wow, anyone's a teacher, because I think unless you've done the job, you really don't understand how difficult it is. And I look at all my colleagues and I'm just in awe of people who can do this job. It's so, we go in and we stand up in front of 30 children, often an audience that is there by force, and we have to, manage those 30 young people and deliver a lesson and keep them enthused and excited, and then we're assessed. We are judged. It's not like, so I've done a lot of what is called science communication, and this is an unpopular thing that I have said to science communicators, is that so I do these live shows to excite people about science, but the people who watch that show don't have to go and have a test. I'm not in any sense responsible for those people learning something. Nobody's going to check. Whereas as teachers, we have this tremendous responsibility, tremendous pressure, and then we have to do it again every hour. And at my school, for example, we have hour-long lessons, and there are days where I have to do it 5 hours of this stuff. And I think ordinary people really don't appreciate how difficult that is. And obviously, everyone's got an opinion on teaching because they went to school, but that perspective of teachers from being a student is so skewed. It really doesn't get. Do you know what I mean? And I really do.
What I love about what you do, we can come to talk about your some of your other things, is that you have done so many things. We could get carried away about the recipes for home science and all sorts of other things. But very directly related to teaching. Another sort of reason why it's like a bridge for me into kind of your most recent book is the work you did, but going back a few years, working with Jonathan Sanderson. He did this fantastic thing about science demos and brilliant website called sciencedemo.org. And you did a video which I thought was like almost like a kind of, for me, a bit of a seminal bit of CPD for science teachers, which I used to share quite often, which was explaining why demonstrations are so useful and how to make the most of them. And you did some classic science demos as part of that. And just watching that, you just think you couldn't have made those videos if you hadn't done those things like 50 times and worked out like how to not just do them, but get the kids to understand what you're doing. And then there's a real kind of like knowledge that you brought to that. And there's this brilliant bit of, for me, a bit of bloggery, which I did, which that I watched your videos and then I
bloggery.
Yeah, I got my students to do the demo, having watched you do it. And we wrote it up on our blog, and you then put it on yours saying, oh my God, students are actually doing the demo the way we showed. And it's like, I love that. But it was like your teacher sense though is brilliant, because you bring it to everything you do, don't you?
Yeah, I think, this is going back to what I was saying. I think it's sad that people don't rate teachers, and actually, we're required to think creatively, and if we're lucky enough to have the time and space to do so, we think deeply about pedagogy, about what we're doing and why. And I think one of the advantages, Emma, of being part-time is that I do have a bit more time and space than full-time teachers to explore these other things. And that is one of the problems with teaching, that we have so much to do that I'm not sure that all teachers are given the opportunity to flourish, to become the best teachers that they can be.
So I mean,
sorry, Tom, I was just going to say that there's a guy that I was watching on Instagram the other day that did this brilliant short reel about teaching, and he's a science teacher, secondary teacher, and he said, I wonder if there's a job where every hour you could have a group of 30 teenagers come into a room who don't want to be there, to try and teach them things that they don't want to know and aren't interested. And then after an hour, if you could swap those for another 30 teenagers who don't want to be in there. And then maybe after I've done all of that, I could go home and write about whether or not they were good or not. And he said, I wonder if there's a job like that. And as you were just describing teaching, I was just thinking of this guy's reel on Instagram about trying to describe the pressures that you have as a teacher, especially when you're teaching children who might not be particularly interested in the content, which I'm going to pick up on when we start talking about your new book, about your introduction, about your little girl and what she thinks about the...
Well, why don't you go with that now? Because let's talk about, I mean, Alom has just produced this brilliant book. I was going to show it on the screen now, but when it's on the YouTube. Why don't things fall up? And it's just it's subtitled "And 6 Other Science Lessons You Missed at School," which is great. And it's a really interesting type of book because it's a science book, but it's like a literary science book. You read it. It's not like diagrams and textbook. It's not a textbook. It's a book you sit and read. And it's like a story unfolds about science, which I want to get into. I've got so many folded down corners. But yeah, Emma, what was your take on the intro?
My question was, sort of, you talk in your introduction to that book about your little girl and her sort of how she's constantly asking why does this happen? Why does this work? How does this work? And I was kind of thinking about the guy from Instagram with his reel about why we think that, why do you think that children go from this insatiable curiosity of finding out about the world to being that kind of quite dry humor of that chap on Instagram saying, why by the time that they're 14, 15, 16, are they not asking why? And are they not interested? And I kind of wanted to get your viewpoint on why you thought we go from being potential, very curious minds to not particularly fascinated with the content.
Well, I don't really know where to start with that question. I think it's such a big question, and my answer is that it's complicated. So I think, unfortunately, children grow up in very different circumstances and have different experiences growing up. And I think from the household they grow up into to the schools they go to and so forth. And I think there are lots of opportunities for children to have their kind of childlike wonder ground away, if that's not nurtured by their parents, by their teachers and so forth. And on top of that, the teenage years, we know that the teenage brain is going through all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So I think some children do manage to hold on to that kind of inquisitiveness, that natural desire to learn. However, I think there are so many factors which affect a child's well-being, if you like, that they haven't got that capacity to and thirst for knowledge that they have when they're very, very young. And it's very sad to see that knocked out of kids when they're primary aged or whatever. And one of the things I feel kind of almost weirdly guilty about, so I came from a very underprivileged background, immigrant child, grew up parents without much parental input, and now my children have this very middle class existence. I'm a teacher, my wife's a doctor. We have the time, the money, the energy to take our children to museums, to indulge them when they're asking why, to read to them and so forth. So my children already have a head start in life, and it makes me very sad that not all children have that start. And my hope for my children is that they go through a schooling where they encounter teachers and peers who allow them to continue to be interested in the world and so forth. And unfortunately, that's not a guarantee even for my children, and so I never blame children for not being interested. I never blame children for not wanting to be in my lessons. I know that, and I'm very aware that I teach in a school that sets or streams or whatever, and I've got the top set, and I teach the A bottom set, whatever you want to call it, and I have different approaches for teaching those kind of classes, but I try not to ever put the responsibility for not being interested or being bored or whatever onto a child, and I do my best to help them. But I feel like one of the things, and one of the reasons why I have continued to teach, and why I think I'm lucky to have become a teacher, and it's a job that works for me, is that I have always remembered what it's like to be a teenager. And I'm not sure all teachers do, I'm not sure all adults do, but for me, my teenage years were really significant, just as they are for most people. My formative years, but I had a particularly tumultuous time growing up, and I think that's given me a deep sense of empathy for young people. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, Emma. I think I might be rambling a bit, but
Well, I think there's a number of things. I mean, I sometimes think this difference is slightly overplayed personally, because I think, like, playing in the sand and being curious about why things do things is slightly different from how do I understand Macbeth or something. And kids can process information and answer simple questions on their own because they can see things, and they don't have to keep asking why, because they can just work it out. But I think that kind of thing of going with what kids are interested in, or kind of making them see what's possible or what the questions are, is a big factor. And you describe it in one of the chapters in your book, which is a chapter which is, I thought this was just amazing. This Are Fish Animals, chapter 6. And you talk about how towards the end, actually, you talk about how you didn't really appreciate quite how grand the kind of work of Darwin was, for example, at the time you went to school. And you sort of say, truth be told, you don't think that your teachers of biology necessarily allowed you to kind of see what was happening. And so the curriculum and the experience was part of that. But it's the teachers kind of knowing the questions to ask, or to show you what the questions are and why it's interesting. So we have a real responsibility there, don't we, to kind of frame the questions to make. So going back now, what do you think your teachers might have done differently that they didn't do?
I mean, I don't think we disagree. I think teachers do have a responsibility, but again, I would come back to the fact that I remember my biology teacher, and looking back now, one of my biology teachers was very, very young, and had difficulties with classroom management and so forth. And, as a teacher myself, I know how difficult the job is. And so I feel I can't be too harsh on people who don't do the job in the best way possible. I don't think all of us can, and I don't think even the best teachers do the best job every day. I think for me, I had, for example, my physics teacher was tremendously influential in my life. He was an older man, he really knew his stuff, and he really loved his subject. And that was not the impression I got from my biology teachers, so.
Yeah, so
Excuse
when
me.
I say like a responsibility, it's not in a sort of critical sense. It just means that then it leads to the training needs and all that, doesn't it? So the story, where I feel the book written, if as I was a science teacher, I'd want to read this book because it's going to help me tell stories which I might not be telling, and in a way which I might not be telling them. And you weave this brilliant thread. So I mean, people could start the first chapter in the book is about rainbows. Why is the sky blue is what it's called. But and when I first started reading, it's my honest view because I'm a science sort of, I've got my own sort of biases. I started reading it and thinking, where are the pictures? Like I want to see it. And I just thought, well, like, where's the pictures? Because I'm looking for a diagram. And but then I just thought, well, there aren't pictures. It's not the way this book's been written. So I let the book do its work on me. And oh my God, I don't need pictures because you've made me imagine it. You've made me visualize it. And you're talking me through. And there's brilliant description of like when the sun goes down and why we see it red. And then the violet comes in when the sun's dropped over the horizon. I just think, I'm with you. And you explain, it's just gorgeous. The language is the way that you communicate the ideas rather than needing to draw things. So I was really fascinated by that. Was that like a deliberate thing to do it that way, or is it just the way that you write naturally?
I'm feeling very flattered, and I'm really delighted, Tom, to hear someone like you get the book. I was kind of scared that people like you wouldn't get it, and I was kind of terrified that what I'm trying to do actually going to work for anyone else, because weirdly, people always ask you who's the audience for the book, right? And I hate that question because yes, you can think of, oh, these types of people should buy this book, and it's a constant question we were always asked in television. Who's the audience, and most. And I'm going to say something that I'm glad my publisher can't change their mind now. I kind of wrote the book for myself. I kind of just wanted to get down how I saw science teaching and what is important. And the diagrams thing, you're going to laugh at this. The reason why there are no diagrams is because the publisher said, please don't put in any diagrams because it doesn't work for audiobooks. It's a very prosaic reason, but it's great because it's that thing. A lot of creative activities, often constraints can force you to be more creative. So that was one of the constraints. And the other constraint, which massively helped me, was I've been wanting to write a book like this for over 10 years. And I never had the bottle. I never thought I could write a book that encompassed like the big ideas of science in a way that would make sense. And so I just never got round to writing it. I repeatedly started a document on my computer because my agent kept saying that's the book you should write, that's the book you should write, and I just never knew how to come at it. And then I was approached to write a very different book to this one, which was the publisher said, oh, we want to write a book about school science that answers childlike questions. And so they wanted very kind of simplistic it was meant to be not this book answering childlike questions. And when I started writing the book, it just came to me that actually, in order to answer these questions, people need to understand science, and in order to understand science, you need the whole story. And so one of the challenges was to come up with questions which would allow me to weave my way towards the ideas that I actually wanted to talk about. So, the book isn't about these 7 questions. The book is about science and the big ideas, and I'm really delighted to hear that you get that it's a narrative. So one of the things I talk about in the book is that science tells us the best creation story that humans have ever come up with. You know, all different cultures have come up with creation myths about how the universe started and so forth. And the science gives us that. You know, if you take the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution by natural selection, we have the best creation story that humans have ever come up with. But in order to really appreciate it, you need to have an understanding of science. You need to know what atoms are. You need to know what chemicals are. You need to know what chemical reactions are. And, you know, the book, coming back to your question about constraints and diagrams, by being constrained by having to answer these childlike questions, it helped me to write the book that I really wanted to write, which was, you know, when I just had a blank document in front of me, which was like, you know, write about all of science, I didn't make any progress. But once I had this constraint of, you know, answer these childlike questions, no diagrams, weirdly, it helped me to write the book.
Anyone would think as well, you had a master in creative writing, to be able to write without diagrams. So it's like the beautiful amalgamation of your areas of expertise, isn't it? The creative writing and the science. It's like the perfect little marriage of those aspects, I should imagine. I just wanted to ask though, you know, the questions that you answer in your book, were there any that you also wish you'd put in there, or kind of ones that remain unanswered?
Yeah, so there's not much geology in the book, and so there was a chapter called "What Are Rocks" that I really wanted to include, and then you know, there's lots of stuff that I've missed out, you know. But yeah, "What Are Rocks"? I really wish I'd written that chapter, but the kind of book, it kind of took a life of its own, in that once I'd written the first few chapters, I knew where I was going to go with it and where it needed to end up. But I had a really awful experience, which was I wrote the first 5 chapters and then I just ground to a halt. I couldn't function. I couldn't write the last 2 chapters, and I just had this horrible, I guess they call it writer's block or whatever, but it lasted about 2 years. It was awful. And I knew I had to write this book and you had to finish it. And literally for 2 years, I could never open my laptop and get on with it. And that was really, really scary. I was just like, I didn't really understand what was going on. But partly what I think it was like my brain just subconsciously working on the concluding chapters, and the concluding chapters. One of the things that I think the book models is a school science education. You know, you start with the basics and you get more and more sophisticated. And you know, the book, you know, by the time you get to the last 2 chapters, you know, you do need to have read the previous chapters, and you know, I think they're more difficult to read chapters. They were more difficult to write. And I think the book kind of mirrors how if you go to school and you do physics up to A level or biology up to A level, you know, there is that tremendous satisfaction of it. Like, I feel like, you know, GCSE science is a little bit, and then if you do an A level, you do feel like you've got a grasp of physics or biology or chemistry. That A level really gives you that deeper level of knowledge that the kids who really love science want. And whereas I think, but it's so much more difficult, right? Like the A level, the jump from GCSE to A level is one that many students struggle with.
Yeah.
And for me, the last 2 chapters, I would say, are the kind of A level levels of the book. In that, you know, for me, the jump between the first 5 chapters and the last 2 chapters, writing it was quite a jump. Not least because it's not my specialist subject. I'm not a biologist. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the many amazing biologists who helped make sure that I got my facts right and so forth.
Well, the last 2 chapters, you know, are fish animals and what am I made of? And it's about DNA. But I think that the chapter on evolution is brilliant, and it's one of my favorite. I'm a physics specialist, but for me, the story of evolution, as you say, is and interesting. It's like this comes up in a lot of my training, because one of my things that I'm fascinated by in the national curriculum, I sort of think the people who wrote it are sort of quiet geniuses, Key Stage 2, because lurking in year 3, you have to sort of talk about rocks, and then in year 6, you have to talk about evolution, and there's all this stuff in there about fossils, and you're sort of building the layers from like rocks, fossils, and then how old's the Earth, and then we've got the time and space to allow ourselves to imagine how dinosaurs could have evolved and become extinct, and living things are, you know, changed, and it's a beautiful thing. And if you know, I always make this thing. So if you don't know that rocks kind of tell the story of time and explain dinosaurs, then you just treat them like some dry old, boring old thing. But if you know this is the beginning of the most profound story ever, you think that's why we learn about rocks. And that's why the books like this are so powerful, because when you read that chapter, or just the chapter about why is the sky blue, you're just filled with all this. It all connects together. You think, oh wow, that's so beautiful. It's so kind of organized, and as someone who understands the science, it's like it's singing to me because I kind of get it. But I'm sort of thinking it's hard to know what it would be like to read it if I didn't know the science, to be honest. But I do really think it's for children, but it's also for parents, it's for teachers. It's great. It's a real accomplishment.
Well, that unfortunately, that's the problem with the publisher, in that I think they don't really know where to pitch it and how to market it. But I'm really glad that I think you've hit on something which I think often gets lost in school science, which is the interconnectedness and how, I know we split it up into biology, physics, and chemistry, but actually, for me, even as a teenager, I kind of loved science as a whole. And as I write in the book, I'm really sad that I felt like my biology education didn't really do enough to convince me of why biology was as interesting and profound as physics and chemistry. And now, I find biology much more interesting. And I think it depends on how science is taught. So in science, in many schools, if you're lucky, I guess from one perspective, you get separate science teachers and you do separate sciences or whatever. But to me, it's the interconnectedness of science that makes it, as we both describe it, that it is this tremendous cultural achievement. It is this phenomenal story, and unfortunately, it's not like an ordinary story where you can just read it. You kind of need to work to really appreciate what a wonderful story it is. But I want more people to have the opportunity to do that, and yes, we're doing our best as science teachers, but as Emma said, lots of children just, for whatever reason, don't engage with it at school, and everyone should have a second chance to do it. Like I'm sure lots of people come to classical music late, or ballet and so forth. And I think for me, one of the kind of recurring themes in my work is that science isn't just for people who want to grow up to be scientists, and science is a part of our cultural heritage. And if you can just be shown how to access it, if you can just be given that gift, then it's like listening to music, and I always say, imagine a life without music or art, and science to me is, I say it in the book, it comes from the same place that art and music and literature comes from, because as humans, all of us, at some point, once we've got food and shelter, we're asking ourselves these big questions. We're trying to make sense of the world. And, I think art and music and literature are expressions of how we make sense of the world, and then sharing our understanding of the world with other people. And that's exactly what science does, right? In a very literal sense, science is about understanding the world and then communicating our understanding of it with other people. And, tell me that's not what music is.
One of the things that parents are involved. Emma, have you ever made any of Mr. Shaha's recipes for wonder?
No, but as you were talking about art, music, and science, I was remembering my A-level biology teacher. I am a biologist, I'm not a physicist. But I remember her talking about, she said, imagine if every single chemical reaction that went on in a leaf played a musical note as it did it, and you lay underneath the tree. Imagine the sound that you would hear. It would be absolutely deafening, and it would be so beautiful to listen to. And I every time I now lie under a tree, that's exactly what I think is my A-level biology teacher saying. If you could hear the music of science, you would never want to stop listening to it. And I was just absolutely fascinated listening to you talk about kind of it's almost like a seductive narrative of science rather than an actual kind of body of facts and knowledge. It's actually that beautiful seductive narrative of what's happening in the world that's missing. So I was just on a little flight of fancy with you and my A-level biology teacher. I'm thinking about music. Sorry.
There's a few things that, I mean, I totally agree with that. And that's like, this is why, there's so much to that you've packed into there. And I love, there's a kind of little nod to your previous work. So at the back of the book, you've got a couple of appendices where you actually do a bit of Mr. Shaha's recipes. I mean, you've done some brilliant work of helping parents bring science home with like kitchen table experiments. And there's a classic jelly bean wave machine. Big fan of that. So that's the back. And it's this sort of thing like, you know, how do I get kids thinking about science if I'm a parent? I mean, you've given them some tools, and that book was wonderful. I mean, there's so many practical ideas in there, but also there's some more sort of other things that you weave into the book. Like, you're really good at kind of modeling the fact that science isn't just a sort of Western kind of origin phenomenon, because you're always telling those stories. And also you talk about the fact that in the chapter about gravity, that Newton, for example, I like the bit where you say he wasn't a very nice person. Also, he didn't do it all, he didn't invent it all himself. So you project science as being a collaborative process with some kind of people get a bit more credit than they deserve. And then finally, the thing about the models, that to me was just, yeah, that's clever. I mean, to weave in the idea that science is, we're forming models, and then the models have to be representations. And that to me is quite an abstract idea. And using the story of light as a model for what is actually happening. There's lots of levels in there. So I'm trying to sort of trail all this to people listening, and it's just packed with stuff. It's like, it's great. I mean, I'm so impressed that you managed to sort of weave all those things into a book.
I'm really glad you appreciate it. As I said, you know, I'm not sure. I don't know how other people respond to the book, and I think it is very much a science teacher's book. You know, I'm proud of being a science teacher. I'm really grateful that somebody gave me the opportunity to write this book, because I actually don't think anybody would have given me the opportunity to write this book if I'd written the proposal. It kind of almost came about by accident, and I'm really glad it exists. I don't know if it, you know, I don't know if anyone will read it, but it's lovely to hear a fellow science teacher who gets it. And in a way, you know, if the only other people who read it are science teachers, you know, I'll be perfectly happy with that, because you know, I think teaching is important, and I think science teaching is important, and I feel very privileged to have been given the opportunity to just, you know, I've got 25 years of thinking about this stuff, and to just write it down in a book is wonderful. And obviously I'd love people to read it, but I'm sure you know what the world of publishing is like, and what it's like to convince people to read these days. You know, I'd love teenagers to read it, but you know, even my best and brightest sixth formers don't read books.
Yeah, it's a struggle. We've got to make them first, then make them available. And I guess it goes into paperback and then audio and all the rest of it.
Yeah, so the audio is quite weird.
I mean, Emma, we talked to a lot of people who have written books about cognitive science and all that research-informed kind of angle. Mm-hmm. So it's really, I think, refreshing and important to have a kind of a more of a narrative style, but also to focus on the content, the ideas that the other people are talking about teaching. So these things sort of mesh together, like how you teach.
I think as well that for a non-scientist, but a teacher of science, it's really important, and that is a lot of professionals and my colleagues who work in primary, is we are teachers of science, but we are not necessarily trained scientists. Not everybody is. So this would be a perfect book for people who are involved in the teaching of science but haven't necessarily got a science background, because it's so accessible and it explains the concept so beautifully, and in such a way that it's interesting and not terrifying. Because if you pick up some science textbooks, if the last time you did science yourself was when you were 16, it can feel quite a long time ago. And you may have forgotten parts of it, but I think this is a beautiful kind of revisit of the kind of the gifts that science has to give us in terms of the stories within it, for those people who maybe are teachers of science but not scientists. I think that's your market there.
That's amazing. I need to write down what you said, something about that was great line. It's one of those that needs to go in the back of the book. I'll have to re-listen to this.
Well,
feel free.
Bless it when it. Well, look, this is the time. I've forgotten this bit. We have to finish. It's sort of, honestly, I've got so many more questions. I haven't even talked about all the pages I folded down. But anyway, anyway. It's not just about the book. I just think I'm gonna start wrapping things up now, because I feel like, it's just a real pleasure talking to someone who's spent a career in teaching as well as doing other things, but also modelling, like Emma said, a balanced career, being creative, still doing the job in a comprehensive school in London. That's the full-on deal, and finding the space to share and reach out to other people and share the ideas in such a magnificent way. So for me, what you're doing and the contribution you're making to our space is amazing. And you've been doing it for 10 years and more. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to my fellow teachers. And honestly, it's incredibly gratifying to hear that you think the book is good, because you were the audience, my fellow teachers, the audience that I was most terrified of. So thank you.
Hopefully they won't once they realise there's nothing, you had nothing to fear there. So thank you so much.
Thank you
everyone listening. Thank you to coming back to Mind the Gap. We had a great year last year, and we've got some great guests coming up this year. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you very soon.